Another thing Christians don't understand about their Bible is that the Gospels were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yes, they were. In fact, one of the best arguments for traditional authorship is that we have unanimous attestation from church fathers. The scholar Simon Gathercole talks about this in his paper, that from various different geographical regions, all early church fathers in the first few hundred years of Christianity agree that the gospel authors are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If the gospels were originally known as anonymous and traditional authorship was made up later, then the discussion about who wrote them should have been like the discussion about who wrote Hebrews, which is truly anonymous. Church fathers were not sure who wrote that book. But when it came to the Gospels, they were all in agreement that the authors are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, despite them writing in various different geographical regions. In fact, there is a ton of evidence to support traditional authorship and the reliability of the Gospels, which we discuss in our 15-part series, which is over 6 hours of content, and you can find it on our channel.
All of the Gospels are anonymous, and scholars agree about this. Even your favorite scholar, Wes Huff, agrees on this point.
You sure about that? Because I messaged Wes, sent him your video, and asked if he agreed. Here's what he had to say. I do not believe that. Not in the way he's articulating it. They are formally anonymous, insofar as if you take the title off the top of the gospel and just read the text, you wouldn't necessarily know any one of the ascribed authors was the author. But guess what? That's true for everything in the ancient world, apart from potentially the two exceptions of Historia Augusta, Life of Aulus, and Lucian's Passing of Peregrine. Of the 60 biographies surviving of Plutarch, none identify Plutarch as the author internally within the body of the text. Do we go around saying that all Plutarch's writings are anonymous? No. When we read lives, we refer to them as Plutarch's lives.
A major problem with the theory of complete gospel anonymity is the utter implausibility that the book was circulating around the Roman Empire as prolifically as the Gospels did without a title for almost 100 years and could somehow at some point be attributed to exactly the same author by scribes in completely different geographical areas and yet leave no trace of disagreements in any of the manuscripts.
And there are numerous other scholars that argue the Gospels were not known as anonymous, like Simon Gathercole, Mike Licona, Martin Hengel, D.A. Carson, Brant Petrie, Luke Vandewey, Craig Blomberg, and many others.
Think about this for just a second. Who were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? The followers of Jesus, these were regular people in that day.
This guy is getting his history wrong. Mark and Luke were not direct disciples of Jesus. They were men who followed the apostles, and Luke was a physician, which means he would have been educated. Papias says that Mark was the interpreter of Peter, which means he also would likely have been educated. Matthew was a tax collector, so he would also have had some form of education. That leaves the disciple John, who could have just gained an education later in life, or he could have wrote through a scribe. Even educated people did this, like